Welcome to another episode of the Rhyme and Reason podcast, brought to you by the College of Arts and Humanities, which we call RHU at the University of Maryland. The Rhyme and Reason podcast is a series of riveting, provocative, fascinating discussions with some of our most compelling leaders in arts and humanities from the University of Maryland. Be sure to subscribe to the Rhyme and Reason podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts so you won't miss a single episode. I'm your host for the podcast, Stephanie Shanakan. I'm the proud dean of the College of Arts and Humanities. Over the next few weeks, we're providing a series of race, equity, and justice conversations right here on the Rhyme and Reason podcast. We'll hear from folks across the RHU spectrum who are studying and thinking about these powerful ideas. It's a great honor to welcome to Rhyme and Reason Nana Kwame Osei Fordjour, an assistant professor in RHU's Department of Communication. Thanks so much for being here, Nana.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And Nana is, he introduces himself around here as Nana from Ghana. So everybody calls him that. Let me tell you a little bit more about Nana. Nana Osei Fordjour is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland. He has over a decade of experience in public relations, and his research revolves around the intersection of public relations, political rhetoric, and media. Specifically, Dr. Osei Fordjour investigates how politicians construct their public image in governance, crises, and elections. He also studies how the media frames politicians and phenomena such as crises to assess their broader implications. So, Nana, I want to step back and talk about how you got into this. What was the journey to this place where you've published a number of articles on rhetoric and public relations and politics? How did you get here?
That's an interesting question. I love this question a lot because I feel like I was, in a way, inoculated with politics from my childhood. Mm-hmm. My dad was a former military man.
You grew up in Ghana?
In Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Ghana. And due to a particular military takeover in Ghana, he became kind of, he didn't go on exile, mm-hmm. but he became kind of a political fugitive in his own country. Now, even though Ghana transitioned to democratic rule in 1992, it was a former military leader. His name was Jerry John Rawlings.
Very notorious.
Notorious, who ruled us for even about 19 years. Yes. And around that time, we had one television. It was the black and white television. Yeah. We all sat behind. I could hear my dad, openly criticizing Jerry John Rawlings for some of the atrocities he committed. It, in a way, systematically indoctrinated me into politics. Because
you had a first-hand view of what was going on.
Of what was going on. So I automatically loved politics from my childhood. Mm-hmm. Even as a first grader, I knew which political party I was sympathetic to.
The bug had bitten, right?
Exactly. So great. Subsequently in college, I ran for office and I was successful at that. And after that, I volunteered for the New Patriotic Party in the 2012 election. Prior to that, I worked in the office of the then national chairman, who had this project where we're monitoring election results because election rigging is very common in our country.
Mm-hmm. So that's rigging of the elections.
Rigging of the elections.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You have to find a way to account for the votes independently as a political party.
Mm-hmm. So, Nana, how did you get from volunteering for campaigns and running for elections at school and so on to being a tenure-track faculty member at the University of Maryland?
Thank you. That's a great question. So after the 2012 elections, I went back to industry and I also went back to school. At the same time, I was doing both of them. And I picked my interest in political communication then. Mind you, I was a PR person. Mm-hmm. So I picked that interest when I studied how the former president of Ghana and the current president of Ghana campaigned on social media. This was a study that I could do without eating. Mm-hmm. I was so
You were
into
in it.
it.
You were
Yes,
in it,
I was
yeah.
in it, enjoying. I mean, and I was like, wow, I want to do this sometime.
I love that.
Yes, I want to do this again. Guess what? I go back to industry, work at an agency, and throughout the period, right, anytime I saw a research article, I was caught up in it, like just reading it. And I was like, I definitely need to go back to school for my PhD. And at a certain point in time, somewhere around 2018, I felt like I had hit the ceiling with my PR practice because I had done it all.
Yeah.
The private sector, government sector, the non-profit sectors. I had done it all.
Yes, and I know that you traveled throughout, like West
Throughout
Africa.
West
I know you were in
Africa.
Nigeria.
I was in Nigeria. I was in Gambia. I was in Burkina Faso. Yeah, I mean, trying to promote healthcare tourism. I was raising funds. I was meeting people, and guess what? Something happens at the Lagos airport.
In Nigeria.
In Nigeria. So this I think they are the immigration officers. Opens my passport and looks at me twice. I'm like, what's it? He said, big man. What he said implied that I didn't have to be there. He said he saw something bigger in me.
Wow.
And he looked, he said, you need more visas in your passport.
Oh, wow.
He said these profound things, and I was just thinking, he said, or anytime Ghanaians come to him, right, they don't give him tips and stuff like that. Of course, I didn't have any tip for him, but he still said all these things, and I left. So in the plane, I was pondering, what does this man mean by big man? What does this man mean by I should be doing more, this is not where I should be? Then the idea of doing a PhD came back to mind. I had that interest already, but this time around, it was reinforced. I'm like, no, this guy has said something. He saw something I didn't see. So then I applied. I remember the first year I was unsuccessful. I tried different schools. Then eventually, the subsequent year in 2019, I got into a program at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque.
That's right.
This was like a great department for me. It was heavily critical. And I got exposed to stuff like race, inequalities and stuff. And for me, that's my nature. That's me. So I really loved that critical nature of that program. And I found an advisor who was great because he was a former PR practitioner who studies political communication.
Perfect.
Those are perfect. And his name is Dr. David Wise. Professor David Wise. He's now a dean, dean at the University College. And the rest is history because he brought the best out of me. Anytime I had an idea, David was like, okay, think about it this way. Go and research and come back and tell me something. And every time I wanted to respond as quickly as possible because I was motivated. Then, of course, I did that. I won a couple of awards at the University of New Mexico and eventually landed this dream job at the University of Maryland, College Park.
Yeah, we're so happy that you're here.
Yeah.
And there's something about, I was talking to an alum of Maryland and he was telling me about dream makers and dream killers. And the professor has the power to make a dream come true and to kill a dream. It sounds like the professor that you came across in New Mexico was a dream maker.
Professor David Wise.
Yeah.
I always speak. I'll never speak ill of him because David was perfect.
That's wonderful. And so you come to the University of Maryland and you meet a group of faculty colleagues, many of whom are also studying political
Rhetoric.
Communication and rhetoric. And so you've really actually found, I imagine, a group of people that you can share ideas with.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, totally. And I don't have to say this, but there was like a tug of war between this great institution and another institution. But one thing that stood out for me here was that all the areas in the Department of Communication were areas I was interested in. PR, political rhetoric, and I do media stuff. And looking also at the caliber of scholars in this department, people I had cited before, even in my dissertation, I'm like, there was no way I was going to the other institution, which is also a great institution, but
glad we won.
There was no way I was going there.
Okay, great. So, what are your thoughts around how political communication works in Ghana and versus here in the United States? What are the differences that you've been able to look at?
Okay.
Because I know that you've published on both.
On both, yes, yes. First of all, I'll talk about the political systems before I move to communication. So a key similarity is that both of them practice what is called the presidential system, where political or executive power is entrusted in the president. So the president will have their own cabinet and they can take certain unique decisions. Yes, that's one. But generally, the U.S. runs what is called the federal system, and where there's that kind of decentralization. Each state has its own governor and or its own governance. In Ghana, it's different.
Yeah.
We don't have governors in Ghana. We practice the unitary system. So the government has maybe representatives even at the district level appointed by the president. So the president there is very powerful and can fire anyone at any time from anywhere. That's the difference in terms of the systems.
Right.
Of course, there's the separation of powers, just like what you have here. But usually, until recently, whoever wins the presidency has that majority in parliament. But that changed in the last election, the 2020 elections. In an unprecedented event or turn of events, we had a speaker of parliament from an opposing party, from the opposition party. Both countries have two major or dominant parties, though they are constitutionally multi-parties. That's the paradox there too. So just like how you have the Democrats and Republicans here, you have the New Patriotic Party in Ghana and the National Democratic Congress in Ghana. Yes. So those are some of the similarities. Now, in terms of political communication, I'll say there are nuances. There's this sharp competition between the two parties here compared to Ghana. Yes. Though it's competitive, you realize that here it has intensified the political polarization you have here, where there are those political attitudes and their ideological extremes. You find that more here than you find that in Ghana. From my studies, I've seen that.
Right.
Now, there's also the profound influence of super PACs here in the United States. You don't see that in Ghana. Ghana, we have what is called a grassroots system. Now, the profound influence of super PACs in the U.S. in a way has also made politics here more murky or more negative, in the sense that they fund viral ads on social media that are usually negative. You also find out that they have targeted messages that mudslinging candidates they are not going for. And also you realize that there's that specific targeted messages for demographics, like racial demographic. I mean, whether it's racial or a certain class, they have gender and all that. They have those targeted messages. It's something you do not have in Ghana. But we also have what is called a grassroots politics, where political parties occasionally engage foot soldiers or serial callers. Serial callers is someone who's paid a token to call on a radio show, contribute, and also insult.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Yes. And there are also the grassroots people who sometimes, we call them armies, occasionally go online to comment and insult. So incivility over the past few years, in Ghana has increased. It's gone so high. I remember I did a study on incivility in Ghana and Nigeria, and I compared the statistics to that of what you have in the US. And trust me,
what did you find?
We found out that it's gotten so close. In the past, like you found incivility in the United States higher than that of Europe. But now you have even the percentages in Africa shooting higher than that of Europe. Specifically in Nigeria and Ghana. Yes. And
what do you think is responsible for that? I know that there's so many things that Ghana and Nigeria follow the U.S. on.
Yes.
Do you think there's influence from what's happening in the United States in civility in our countries?
Globalization, or some people call it glocalization, is one of them. Some people just blind copy.
Yeah.
Online, because the world has become a global village due to social media and the new media technologies. People see what's happening here and they want to kind of copy it.
That's right.
Now, also, the ethnic divisions in Africa contribute to that. When you look at the thematic analysis of some of these uncivil discourses, you realize people calling even the president, excuse me to say, and forgive me, I'm not being this, and Fulani, a Fulani this, a Fulani that. The name calling, ethnic name calling was so profound in both countries. So the role of ethnicity in a way...
It sure showed up in the last Nigerian the presidential election.
Exactly.
With the Igbos and the rest of them. Which has some echoes of the Biafran War, right? And the Civil War. So these are really dangerous paths.
So dangerous.
Right?
And in Africa, right, we are in kind of a volatile region where anything can happen.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily have that system that can support these kind of things. When they go to a certain extreme, anything can happen. And that's what we pray doesn't happen in the upcoming elections. We have elections this year, just like the United States. It's just a month after the US elections in Ghana. Nigeria had yours last year.
That's right.
Yes, and we are having ours this year. So we pray the tensions surrounding electoral rigging and collation of votes don't escalate or de-escalate. I mean, it might be a serious challenge and it might have devastating effects on the country's democracy.
Yeah, and the thing that I think that we forget is that the system here in the U.S. is hundreds of years old.
Yes.
The systems that we have in West Africa are not that
years,
old.
About, on the average, 30, 35.
Right, because after independence, we went through the military regimes, and then we got to democracy sometime in the 80s and 90s in some cases. So very young democracies.
And fragile.
Yeah, young and fragile.
Yes.
How has social media exacerbated these tensions?
So a senior colleague I follow, who's called Henry Jenkins, talked about the spreadable media. Considering the instantaneous ability of messages to reach multiple people in a way, right, makes things like misinformation and fake news so problematic.
That's right.
Yes. So things that are not true. For example, recently in Ghana, a Muslim presidential candidate was described as, there was this fake news about this leader eating pork. And you know what that means in the Islamic community?
Yeah, taboo.
It's a taboo. Yes. Now this person is being mudslinged and being associated with a taboo. In a way, it creates that in-group division for him,
of course,
for this candidate and that. But this thing went viral. It went viral and everybody was picking back on it. There was another thing of alleged affairs between a former president and another lady, which was clearly Photoshop. And this also went viral. So the way fake news and, mudslinging spreads in the era of new media makes it more, in a way, dangerous for us. Yes, and it charges the system a lot. So you realize that the current sentiments on social media comments are mostly negative from the current studies. I'm doing some studies now on the Ghanaian election, and you can see that, yes, they are spiraling, right? They are going so high, and they are hitting rates we haven't seen before in previous studies. And for me, that is disturbing.
That is disturbing. I want to ask you a question about your students. What level of engagement are you seeing? What are you teaching? And how can you? One of the things I love about the College of Arts and Humanities is that we offer our students a global view of various themes.
Yes.
Are you able to do that for us? And what do you find?
I do that a lot. So currently I'm teaching a strategic communication class, which is a senior level class, and I'm also teaching a junior research methods class. This is what I do. This has been my philosophy. I usually internationalize my classes. So Stratcom, because I was a former practitioner, I usually tell them how I navigated some phases or challenges in industry. I give them so much practical examples, and I bring in a lot of guests from industry, from around the world.
That's great.
A lot of them, of course, from Africa. And whenever students encounter these guests, they are so excited. They look forward to it. They are so engaging because sometimes they think Stratcom or PR is restricted to the West or the United States. But when they hear how things are being done there, they are amazed. For example, one of my students was asking one of my guests about the role of the radio in strategic communication. And the radio plays a crucial role compared to the United States. Most strategies in the United States are either in person or online. But in Ghana and parts of Africa, radio plays a crucial role. If you're running a campaign and you don't include the radio station, trust me, you might not reach certain crucial targets or stakeholders. So
because the radio can still be heard in the villages, in the small rural areas.
Places car cannot go to.
And no Wi-Fi.
No Wi-Fi.
That's right.
Yes, people, when I told them this, sometimes they're like, is that even possible? I'm like, yes. I remember I worked at a place called the National Identification Authority. We were required to register citizens and foreign nationals in Ghana. Now, my post was in a certain very remote area. No water, no electricity. It wasn't easy for me. But
because you had grown up in Accra.
In Accra, in the capital.
In
yes,
the
so
capital.
You can imagine.
Yeah,
it wasn't
city.
easy for me. Yes, and all that. Now, in an area like that, whenever you're running a campaign, one thing they had there was these portable radios there. They had one for the community, and some rich people who were considered rich had individual ones in their household. So in case I wanted to, follow the news or update myself, I either went to the community radio or went to one of these rich families. In an area like that, to my point, to reach them, you have to use the radio, and especially if it's a healthcare campaign. For example, encouraging people to get vaccines. You cannot use the television or internet to reach them.
That's right.
But that's not the case here in the United States. And students hear this and they are wondering, wow, is it even possible? Does this even exist? So for me, giving them that international perspective gives me that sense of fulfillment.
That's great. That's exactly what we hope our students are getting.
Yeah.
So that they can be ready, for whatever the job is that comes. And some of these may be international jobs, but even local jobs are going to require them to understand where people come from, right? Awesome. So you're one of the dream makers at the University of Maryland. Let me end with a question, Nana, about what are your hopes for the future of democracy in West Africa, and maybe even here in the United States.
Okay. Let me start with West Africa. My hope is that we'll come to a certain point where there is transparency in our political system or in our politics. People say things and go scot-free. They are not held accountable. So for me, I want us to get to that point where there's that transparency and also accountability in our system. I want us to get to a point where whenever we're having elections, I'm not concerned or worried about the
safety and security
and all that of the country and also the people. Because I still have family in Ghana.
Sure.
I'm thinking about them anytime we have elections. Anything can happen. And I mean, it's happened in neighboring countries like Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso. So, and I'm praying it doesn't happen to them, because in that case, you become homeless or shelterless because you can't go back home. I'm praying that we get to a certain point where I can say anything here and not be politically victimized.
Or your family.
Or my family, yes. So that's what I'm hoping will happen in that part of the world. Now here, I'm also looking at a system that will regulate the activities of these super PACs. Yes, especially considering how they support or promote or sponsor negative campaigns. I hope there are more regulations bounding or guiding sponsorship and also sponsorship of negative arts, especially because in a way it does not advance democratic discourses in the United States or the broader democratic discourse. So for me, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a situation where anybody, no matter their identity, can hold office, and they will not be judged based on their identity, but they'll be judged based on their competence. That's what I'm hoping for, particularly in the U.S., which prides itself as the beacon of democracy.
Or to quote a great American, the content of their character.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I know I said that was the last question, but last is how important is it for us to train humanists, people in communication, in PR, to fulfill the vision that you have for democracy in West Africa and in the U.S.?
Okay, so we are talking about PR here. So generally, right, PR centers around communicating to manage relationships. Now, for me, it's important to train them because you can hold them after training to high ethical standards. It's about ethics here. Wherever they go, they need to be ethically sensitive. There are certain things you can't say. You cannot just write anything as a practitioner. And for me, that's why it's important for us to train them here. We give them practical examples. For example, tomorrow in my Stratcom class, I'm going to ask them to set up their own, organizations and kind of write their own ethical standards. And they are looking at what has been done before, but they're also coming up with their own. And this should be in line with their vision and mission. For me, that helps. When they go out there, they are going to impact society positively because, of course, they've been taken through, they know what is right and what is wrong. Yeah, so in a way, you can hold them to higher ethical standards when they go out there. So for me, the inculcating the value of ethics in them now is very crucial to their training. For me, that's what I'll say.
I like that because it ties back into what your hopes are.
Yes.
Right, and a lot of those hopes hinge on communication. They hinge on what we say, how we are represented, how we represent our ideas, and therefore how they're implemented.
Yes.
Right? So, Nana, I cannot thank you enough for coming on Rhyme and Reason. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. And I've enjoyed my time here.
That's great. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of some of the most important questions concerning race, equity, and justice. Please join us again on Rhyme and Reason. In our hue, we're proud to be UMD's movers and shakers. In our classes, in our research, and in our community engagement, we're both art makers and world changers. Be sure to visit www.rhue.umd.edu to learn more about the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland and about our efforts to see a more equitable and just future for all of us. Thanks for listening.